we don't have much time until a bill will be voted on that impacts crypto holders. This is the United States infrastructure bill sitting on the House floor. And hidden in this spending bill is new legislation on crypto. However, it seems like there's a lot of confusion on what this legislation actually does. So having a lot of personal experience in interpreting this kind of legislation, I decided to do my part here and break down this bill to show what it really does, and then this way you can make more informed decisions going on from here in the future. So let's talk about this bill's likely future, what's in the bill, how it impacts crypto, and where the confusion lies here. So the bill in question is the $1 trillion United States bipartisan spending bill. This massive bill is made to give the United States a kind of infrastructure facelift, and has already passed in the Senate and now needs a thumbs up from the House and from the President, and then it will go into effect. I know this is a weird place to add laws on crypto within a bill that's supposed to focus on like roads and bridges and stuff like that, but welcome to American politics. Now, the House is set to vote on this bill on Thursday, the 30th of September, so very soon. If you're not familiar with how legislation works in the US, about 90% of the time, you know whether a bill will be passed or not ahead of time for two reasons. First, because legislators will signal which way that they plan to vote. And second, leaders will typically not put a bill on the floor for a vote unless they first have all the votes they need to pass it. They just don't waste their time like that. In fact, here is what Nancy Pelosi said about this week's vote.
Let me just say we're going to pass the bill this week.
So it's far more likely than not that this bill will be passed this week. The issue with this bill is the poorly written language within the bill that impacts crypto, and that's what you're here for. The intention was to collect some more tax revenue from crypto, but it was written too broadly, and it oversteps some boundaries that crypto enthusiasts and crypto lobbyists are like, hey, hold on, we gotta fix this language a little bit. Now, crypto lobbyists fought this language in the bill about a month ago, but unfortunately failed. And we're now stuck in a situation where poorly written laws on crypto are very likely to be passed. Not a great situation to be in, but I don't want you to lose all hope, because there could be a solution still. Don't go crazy, don't go selling off everything, just watch to the end of the video. So let's first talk about what's in this bill more specifically, and then we'll go deeper into our options regarding crypto. Now, luckily for us, I spent an ungodly amount of time combing through the 2,700-page bill text last month, and I handmade 13 graphs to show exactly where funding is going. So contextually, I've broken this bill into two major parts: new funding and existing funding. About half the bill is simply continuing funding on existing projects, so we're not going to focus much on that. We're going to focus on new spending and new laws only. So here's a top-line overview of the new spending in this bill. We can see there's a lot of money here. $110 billion to roads, bridges, and major projects. $66 billion to passenger and freight rail programs. $11 billion to safety. $39 billion to public transit. $65 billion to broadband. $17 billion to ports and waterways. $25 billion to airports. $7.5 billion to school bus and ferry emissions. $73 billion to power and grid, $55 billion to water infrastructure, and $46 billion to resiliency. Now let's break this down a little bit further and look at each section individually. The largest one is roads, bridges, and major projects. We have bridge grant programs. We have the RAISE grant. This is funding for roadways, rails, and ship transportation. We have multimodal and freight transportation. This is basically freight infrastructure. The infra grant. This is railroad updates, research, Amtrak funding, updates to the you're not going to believe this. This updates the Amtrak smoking policy within the funding of this bill. That's literally in the bill text. The Appalachian Highway, this is funding for areas in the 13 Appalachian states. Helps the highway there. Then we have passenger, freight, and rail for the next major section. Northeast Corridor grants, this is funding for maintenance and the backlog of the Amtrak. So you can see there's a lot going on here with the Amtrak and other railway kind of spending. We have intercity passenger rail funding. This another funny thing here. This includes a study on trains larger than 7,500 feet. We have the Amtrak National Network, rail infrastructure and safety, and railroad crossing elimination program. This just basically eliminates dangerous railroad crossings. The next major section is public transit. So there's a big section here of increased contracts. There's a 43% increase in funding for the next 5 years here. State of good repair. They basically are saying 40% of buses and 23% of rail assets are in poor conditions, and this supports the repair and maintenance for those things. Capital investment grants. This is funding for a new and expanded commuter and light rail project. Also bus services and ferry services. A lot with ferries here as well. You're going to see that repeated a whole bunch of times. And senior and disabled mobility, this basically just removes barriers to transportation for all. The low-no program, this is for the purchase and lease of zero or low emission buses. Then we have safety and research. So increased contracts for the FMCSA and the NHTSA. The Safe Streets for All program, this just basically plans to reduce crashes and fatalities of cyclists and pedestrians on roadways. And then we have safety programs for driver behavior and safety for commercial vehicles within here. And then airports. We have formula airport funding. Now, what this means is they basically give airports discretionary funding to spend money on the things that they think they need to spend money on. This could be runways, taxiways, noise reduction, terminal funding, you name it. Then we have discretionary funding for small airports and funding for air traffic control. Then we have ports and waterways, and don't worry, there's not a whole lot left here. A lot of funding for the Army Corps of Engineers. This includes funding for project backlogs, funding for inland waterways, ecosystem restoration, shore protection, a whole lot more there. Port infrastructure and marine highways. This is improvements to port facilities on coasts, rivers, and lakes. Funding for the U.S. Coast Guard. Ferry and terminal construction. A lot with ferries, like I said. Land ports of entry, this is just port modernization. Then we have broadband funding. So the private activity bonds, this is funding for broadband in rural areas. Affordability, construction, and tech. So basically what they're doing here is they're looking at the middle mile companies, so the companies who assist in the transmission of broadband, and they're either giving them more funding or they're doing some acquisitions here. And they plan to subsidize broadband rates in certain areas. That way it's more affordable for everyone. Tribal grants to increase broadband in tribal areas. Then we have grants to states, which is a project that's aiming to get 100 megabyte download speeds and 20 megabyte upload speeds, basically everywhere in the US. Then we have power infrastructure, which includes grid infrastructure, clean energy, fuels and tech, and hydropower. Then we have water infrastructure, which is needed here in the US. This just helps aging infrastructure repair, increase water storage, desalination efforts, water recycling, dam safety, and a whole lot more there with water. Then we have resiliency. FEMA, ton of money going to FEMA and projects that reduce risks of natural disasters. Waste management, which is like recycling education, battery recycling, ocean debris reduction, drought funding. You know what that is. Funding for ecosystems, which is just funding for like lakes and natural habitats, wildfire management, and then cyber. This is to help develop a consensus as to what the U.S. should do during cyber attacks, which has been a huge issue recently. And then lastly, we have school bus and ferry emissions, $7.5 billion. So the Clean School Bus Program, the Ferry Grant Program, and the Electric Ferry Pilot Program. Now, after hearing this, you might be thinking like, okay, so how does crypto fit into this? And you wouldn't be alone in thinking that doesn't make total sense. But crypto fits in because they plan to collect additional taxes from crypto in order to pay for a portion of this bill. That's how it fits in. A small portion of the bill, that is. Now, hidden away on page 2433 are new laws for crypto regulations within this infrastructure bill. So let's break those down. Hopping over to the bill, we can see information reporting for brokers and digital assets. This is what we're looking for here. So first, we're going to do some defining and make sense of the gobbledygook that is legislative text. So first, we're going to look at the definition of digital asset, which is right here. Digital asset means any digital representation of value which is recorded on a cryptographically secured distributed ledger or any similar technology. Now we need to scroll up here and look at brokers, because this is one of the major issues here in the reporting of digital assets. So brokers. And the definition of brokers is in another law. So this is something that happens a lot in legislative text. They just refer to other ones. So it's like impossible to read and you have to pull up other bills. So here we have the law that says what brokers are and what they should do. And one major thing that they should do is show the name and address of each customer. If we scroll down a little bit here to the definitions, one of them is any other person who regularly acts as a middleman with respect to property or services. Now, in this instance, a broker is very loosely defined in the case of crypto. This could encompass stake pool operators, miners, and a ton of other crypto services that could technically be considered brokers. So if we scroll down further here, we can see what brokers are required to report to the IRS. We have to scroll way down here. And one of them is a specified security in this section B. So if we go back to the bill text here, it says that they need to strike out a section of the bill text and add in any digital asset within this definition of a specified security. which means any broker, which is given a large definition here, has to report these specified assets, which now encompasses any digital asset. And then this brings us to the second issue. Don't worry, I'm going to summarize all this. The second issue is the reporting. So reporting here, we can see any broker, which we know this is a loose definition now, with respect to any transfer during a calendar year, shall make a return for that year. Now, these words in between that make no sense. This basically says any broker who processed a transfer in a calendar year of a digital asset, which was defined earlier, will need to report it to the IRS, and they need to treat that transfer as they would treat cash. The treatment as cash for the purposes of Section 6051D. Now, if we look at the text for that, this basically says any transfer of more than $10,000 needs to be reported to the IRS. So to summarize this, there's a few issues within this bill text that people absolutely do not like, and for good reason. First, the loose definition of broker that can encompass a miner, a stake pool operator, certain DeFi operators. Second, the KYC requirements for nearly anything having to do with crypto. And third, reporting requirements that are very similar to cash. Now, if you're a normal crypto buyer who pays their taxes, will this impact you? No. At least not directly. This is where I think the confusion really lies. This is far from the end of the world, in my opinion. If you run crypto services like a stake pool, or you're a miner, you run some kind of DeFi service, this could very well impact you. Now, this impact of those services may have secondary and tertiary effects to crypto holders if it means fewer people use DeFi or crypto is less prevalent in general. But I'm here to say that even this is fairly unlikely. And this is because, and I quote, "The Treasury has reportedly said that it will provide clarifying guidance after the bill is passed to provide exemptions to firms who do not actually operate as brokers." Now, what does this mean exactly? It basically means that the fears of this impacting miners and stake pool operators and other DeFi operators is a fairly unlikely worst case scenario. And this is fairly common in legislative texts where a law will be made, but it's up to the agency to come up with specific guidelines. I saw this personally with small business stimulus programs. Money was allocated to help small businesses, and then the SBA had some discretion to build out the finer rules and finer details. So with a flurry of worry and agitation about this bill language, it won't go unnoticed by the Treasury and the IRS, who will then likely make additional adjustments to the actual language. These adjustments are so common that they actually have a name. It's typically called an interim final rule. So in summary, while this language would be better off fixed before being passed into law, the odds are on our side that it won't blow up into a massive issue like some news outlets may lead you to believe. So I hope that this was helpful in understanding the situation, the bill, and what may happen in the future. And as always, I hope you have a profitable day.
We have to honor the vision of President Biden, and we thank him for his package.